What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with Tech Daily, and in this video, we are doing a speed test comparison between some of the newest 2021 Samsung Galaxy A series phones. These are almost all the ones that are out right now, at least, and if you're in the market for a new device, but maybe aren't sure which sort of tier of A series phones is right for you and your needs, hopefully this video helps you out a little. For this comparison, we have the A02s, which is pretty much the lowest end A series phone for this year right now. It comes in at around $150, and yes, there's a regular A02, but please don't buy that. It's terrible. This one is really as low as you should go. The next step up is the A12. This device retails for around $180. And I think out of all of them, this is the device I would consider to be the best all-around value. Then we have the brand new A32 5G. This phone just came out. It's all new, totally redesigned, but it's a pretty big price jump. It retails for a bit more than $300 at the moment. And finally, the last one for this comparison is the A42 5G. This device actually came out back in like November, and while it has come down in price a little bit since then, it's still about a $320 device right now. So those are the phones, and before we get into the speed test, I just want to quickly go over the specs and configurations so you know what it is we're working with. And you can also see a breakdown of the Geekbench scores as well to sort of put some real numbers to these specs. The A02s is powered by the Snapdragon 450 chipset, and my phone here is the model with 4 gigs of RAM. The A12 has the MediaTek Helio P35 processor and 4 gigs of RAM as well. The A32 5G gets the fairly new MediaTek Dimensity 720 5G processor paired with 6 gigs of RAM. And finally, the A42 5G has the Qualcomm Snapdragon 750 5G chipset and 6 gigs of RAM as well. So we get a nice mix of Qualcomm versus MediaTek processors, 4 gigs of RAM versus 6. You can see all those stats in the device care menu here as well, with each phone ready to go. And on the software side of things, we have a couple more differences too, actually. The lower end A02s and A12 run Samsung's One UI Core along with Android 10, while the A32 and A42 have the full One UI experience. But the real big thing to consider is that the A32 5G is the only device in the lineup right now with One UI 3.1 and Android 11. So all the latest software updates for that phone, but each device has been updated to their latest update and security patch that's available right now. Also, obviously all these phones have also been set up in the same way with pretty much all the same apps installed. They've all been charged up to 100% as well, so everything should be about as equal and as even as I can make it. So to start off here, we'll just run through some of the default Android apps and the general UI experience. And to me, there are a couple of things that kind of stand out here already. In general, with most of the easy apps, I don't really consider there to be a huge difference in launch and load times, even between the two extremes, like the A02s and the A41. The difference most times is going to be a fraction of a second, if that, and for the most part, this isn't really where you're going to notice anything too drastic. If you're mainly going to use your phone for text messages, phone calls, checking the weather, browsing the web, simple stuff like that, then the lower end phones can still keep up pretty well. Now, I will say that out of all these phones, just keep an eye on the A32 5G with its Android 11 and One UI update, because not only will you be able to pick out little differences in how the apps launch, how things load, and maybe some of the new features or changes, but you might also find that while the device isn't the most powerful, the better optimized software with the newest update could help it along a little more. There's definitely a chance that all these phones do get Android 11 and One UI 3, but in the meantime, this side-by-side comparison, I think with the updated A32, hopefully can give you an idea of some of the changes and better optimized experience if you don't yet have the updates on your phone either. Now, jumping into Google Chrome and loading up some web pages and videos, I just want to mention that all these phones are on the same Wi-Fi connection, of course. I'm not doing any 5G tests here because there are just way too many factors with that. But obviously, I can't always control the internet speeds and load times. Still, for the most part, things are going to sort of fall in line like you'd expect. The A42 generally loads pages faster. The A02 is generally the last to fully load everything. The differences here are maybe a little more obvious than before, but the lower end phones are still keeping up pretty well. However, with some websites games with a ton of ads or a lot of different content all over the page, I think you'll find that the A02s and A12 tend to get a little more jittery with their scrolling. The more content on the page, the more you'll notice those blips with the lower end phones. But again, it's not a major issue, just something you'll likely start to notice with these side-by-side comparisons. With YouTube, I actually found that, while again the scrolling tended to be a little choppy on the lower end devices every once in a while, generally speaking, all four phones launched and played all the videos pretty seamlessly, which is great. Nowadays, these phones are just content consumption machines. I know YouTube videos are obviously something most people will be watching fairly often, and I consider all these phones to be solid in that regard. And actually, if you want to do a little bit of multitasking here, maybe have a YouTube video playing while you're browsing the web or shopping online, all four phones do a nice job with that as well. Keep in mind that even though the A02s and A12 are like half the price compared to the A32 and A42, these only have 2 gigs less RAM, 4 versus 6. It's not a huge difference. And this is a prime example of those phones keeping up quite nicely. Obviously, it's not a particularly extreme test with these couple apps loaded, but I still think it's something that a lot of people would do in their day-to-day use, so I figured it was important to show. And honestly, up to this point, I really don't consider these phones to be too far apart at all, which is really interesting. Jumping into Google Maps, now with also 8 or 10 apps already running on these phones, things are a little slower as we go down the line, but again, it's not too terrible. We're talking maybe a fraction of a second still of a difference between each phone. And again, I think if you're keeping things casual with your smartphone usage between these devices, I can't imagine you'll find a huge difference in load times or performance, which to me is something surprising. In my opinion, it does kind of make the A02s and A12 look like even better values maybe, considering how much money you could potentially save. Obviously, the real difference between these four phones is going to be when we start to load up some more graphics heavy stuff like games. This is not only where you'll start to see a big difference in general load times, but perhaps also some minor blips in performance with the lower end phones, though fortunately nothing that makes these games like unplayable. Now, on the one hand, if you have no interest in gaming, or maybe you can stand a few extra seconds to load into a game, it's not a huge deal. But if gaming is something you do pretty often on your smartphone, this I think is probably where spending the extra money is going to be most worth it. Right off the bat, you can almost see this straight divide between the two lower end phones and the two higher end phones. They kind of launch and load things almost in tandem with one another. And that, in my opinion, is just because of both the 4 gigs and 6 gigs of RAM difference now, and the big difference in processors. The A32 and A42, while they have different powerhouses inside, are still fairly new mid-range 5G chipsets, and that definitely shows here. Now, more than anything, what I consider to be the biggest plus here is that if you can get past the load times, performance-wise, the lower end phones are still pretty solid in the gaming experience they do offer. Like I said, aside from some blips from time to time, I don't really see any major performance issues. There's no consistent frame drops or crazy choppiness in any of these apps. So in my opinion, playability is not really an issue with the lower end phones. It's just a matter of taking those few extra seconds, sometimes a little more than that, to get into the game in the first place. Now, if you're maybe curious about app management and things running in the background, like I said already, I don't always consider the RAM difference to be too drastic, and I found that each of these phones kept most of the same apps current while requiring pretty much the same ones to be reloaded as well. I did find though that every once in a while, the A32 5G could keep some additional stuff running and ready to go, like this game for example. Not entirely sure what accounted for these certain little instances, whether it was a software thing or just happened to be by random chance, but I thought that was kind of interesting. On the other side of things though, after about an hour of usage and testing with all this, taking a quick peek at the battery percentage here, they all have the same 5,000 milliamp capacity, but the A12 actually retained 97% of its battery throughout this test, while the A32 5G dropped down to 93%. It's kind of surprising to me, and no, it wasn't because I had like 5G running or anything like that, and no, it's not a crazy huge difference that means too much, but again, I just thought that was kind of something worth pointing out. So there you go, just a bit of a side-by-side comparison between these four A series phones. All in all, while they certainly do perform differently, I think it might depend more on what it is you want to get out of these phones. If you're just an average everyday user who uses the phone for simple stuff, going with the A02s or A12 really isn't a bad move. And like I said earlier, I consider the A12 to probably be the best value out of the lineup when it comes to the price and what you get. But both of those lower end phones really held up well in comparison. On the flip side, it's pretty obvious that the A32 and A42 have a decent advantage, particularly with gaming. So if that's your thing, it might very well be worth spending a little more for better performance. But what do you guys think? Were you surprised by these results? Is it about what you expected? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to know your thoughts, of course. But hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. Be sure to follow Tech Daily on Twitter and subscribe to the Tech Daily YouTube channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys later.